born into darkness. The Black family has one of the strongest pureblood bloodlines in the entire Harry Potter series, and honestly, some of the most interesting characters to ever come out of that family are three sisters. Cygnus Black III and Jurella Rosier, both purebloods, both deeply connected to Voldemort and his growing army of Death Eaters, married and had 3 daughters in the 1950s. Bellatrix, the oldest, Andromeda the middle, Narcissa the youngest. From the moment they were old enough to listen, all 3 were taught the same thing. Pureblood wizards were superior. Muggleborns were beneath them. Blood was everything. The Black family name meant something, and keeping it that way wasn't a suggestion. It was simply the way things were in that house. All 3 went to Hogwarts and were sorted into Slytherin, one after the other, as if the hat barely needed a moment. The family would have accepted nothing less, and the hat apparently agreed. Now at Hogwarts, you start to see the cracks. Bellatrix gravitated immediately toward students who were already on their way to becoming Death Eaters. Narcissa moved in similar circles, though she carried herself differently, more composed, more calculated, less likely to scare people in hallways. And then there was Andromeda, also Slytherin, same family, same upbringing, and somehow, quietly, she started pulling away from all of it. So Hogwarts was over, and that's when everything got darker. They got married. When the time came to marry, all 3 sisters made choices that revealed everything you needed to know about who they were. Bellatrix married Rodolphus Lestrange, a fellow pureblood she had known since Hogwarts. Now, if you read every single page of the Harry Potter series looking for one moment of genuine warmth between them, good luck. You will not find it. Not one. She never mentioned him affectionately, never bore him a child, never once looked at him the way she looked at Voldemort. The marriage was obligation dressed up as tradition. A pureblood matching a pureblood because that was what the Black family did. Bellatrix fulfilled the requirement and immediately moved on. Her devotion belonged to a noseless man, and everyone who knew her understood that perfectly. Narcissa was different. She genuinely fell for Lucius Malfoy, another pureblood from a family just as wealthy and well-connected as the Blacks. There was real affection there, real loyalty, the kind that would eventually push her to do things that even surprised herself. Together, they built an extraordinary life. Malfoy Manor, enormous wealth, a son named Draco born in 1980 whom Narcissa loved so fiercely it would become the most defining thing about her entire existence. Lucius hardened Draco with pureblood ideology, preached to him about blood status, shaped him in the Black and Malfoy tradition. Narcissa simply adored him. Both things were true simultaneously and neither canceled the other out. And then there was Andromeda. She fell in love with Ted Tonks, a Muggleborn. Now, in a family that burned people off the tapestry for lesser offenses, marrying a Muggleborn was not just a scandal, it was a declaration. Andromeda knew exactly what she was doing and she did it anyway. The family responded immediately. Her face was burned off the Black family tree right alongside Sirius Black's. Narcissa, when asked about her sister years later, was cutting and precise. They had not set eyes on Andromeda since she married Ted Tonks. That was that. Done. Gone. As far as the Blacks were concerned, she never existed. So now you have 3 sisters living completely different lives. Andromeda and Ted built something quieter, less wealthy, less prestigious, but significantly warmer. They raised their daughter, Nymphadora, who hated being called that and made sure absolutely everyone knew it, preferring simply Tonks, in a household built on decency rather than status. Meanwhile, Narcissa raised Draco in extraordinary luxury, expensive care packages, the best broomsticks money could buy, every comfort a child could possibly want. And Bellatrix was not raising anyone. She was following Voldemort with the kind of devotion that should probably have concerned people considerably earlier than it did. But then in 1981, Voldemort fell, and what happened next split these 3 sisters apart in ways nobody could have predicted. The Black sisters' breaking point. When Voldemort fell, the Death Eaters did what most people do when the thing they backed suddenly collapses. They scattered and started lying. Most of them claimed they had been acting under the Imperius Curse the whole time. Yeah, okay. That Voldemort had controlled them against their will. Lucius Malfoy said exactly that, kept a straight face, and walked free. Narcissa exhaled. Life for the Malfoys continued more or less as normal. Bellatrix did the complete opposite. She stood in front of the court and told them exactly where her loyalties were, proudly. She wasn't going to pretend she hadn't done what she did. She sat in the chain chair like it was a throne, and as they dragged her out toward Azkaban, she screamed at the judge, Barty Crouch, that the Dark Lord would rise again, that they alone had been faithful, and that when he returned they would be rewarded beyond any of his other followers. Not exactly the speech of someone who had been acting against their will. Now, before all of this, before the capture, before the trial, Bellatrix and her group had done something the wizarding world would never forget. They went after Frank and Alice Longbottom, both Aurors, both members of the Order of the Phoenix. Bellatrix believed they had information on Voldemort's whereabouts, so they tortured them for hours. When Frank refused to talk, they went after Alice. When Alice refused, they kept going. The four of them, Bellatrix, Rodolphus, Rabaston, and Barty Crouch Jr., tortured the Longbottoms so severely that both were driven permanently out of their minds. They spent the rest of their lives in St. Mungo's Hospital, unable to recognize their own son. That son was Neville Longbottom, the same boy who would one day pull a sword out of a hat at the Battle of Hogwarts. While Bellatrix rotted in Azkaban, Andromeda was raising Tonks in a world that had nothing to do with any of this. Tonks went to Hogwarts, was sorted into Hufflepuff, which, given who her aunts were, is honestly hilarious, and by 1994 had qualified as an Auror after years of grueling training. Andromeda was proud. She was also quietly terrified, because having a daughter who hunts dark wizards for a living is not exactly a relaxing situation. Then Voldemort came back. Peter Pettigrew cooked him back into existence using a ritual that somehow managed to restore his entire body, his powers, and his ego, but completely forgot the nose. 14 years of waiting, and the best they could do was a face that looks like it lost an argument with a wall. Anyway, he was back. He called his Death Eaters to him and made a specific point of acknowledging the Lestranges. They had gone to Azkaban rather than deny him, and he intended to honor that with a mass breakout that sent the Ministry into full panic mode. Bellatrix walked back into the world 14 years older, gaunt, skull-like, and burning with the exact same energy she had walked in with. The war was starting again, and this time it was going to be worse. Much worse. The war begins again. Now here's where things start moving very fast. Voldemort needed a prophecy, one that had to do with him and Harry Potter, and he sent Bellatrix and Lucius to the Department of Mysteries to get it. What followed was a disaster, depending on which side you were on. Bellatrix met her niece Tonks for the first time and immediately tried to kill her. They dueled. Bellatrix won, leaving Tonks badly injured. Before that, Tonks managed to stun Lucius, which led directly to his capture. And then in the middle of all of it, Bellatrix killed her own cousin, Sirius Black. Harry chased her afterward and tried to use the Cruciatus curse on her, the torture curse, out of pure rage. She didn't even flinch. She probably wanted it. She just laughed at him and told him he needed to really mean it, to actually enjoy causing pain before it would work properly, which tells you everything you need to know about Bellatrix Lestrange. Lucius being caught was a turning point for the entire Malfoy family. The name that had stayed clean for years was now front page news. He went to Azkaban, Narcissa was left to manage the fallout alone, and Voldemort, still furious at Lucius for failing the mission and getting himself caught, decided to punish the whole family in the most calculated way possible. He gave their 16-year-old son the task of killing Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of their age. If Draco failed, the consequences would fall on all of them. Narcissa went to Severus Snape and begged him to help. She showed up at his door in tears, convinced that Voldemort was sending a 16-year-old on a mission designed to get him killed, and she wasn't wrong to think so. Snape agreed to help, which should have been the end of it, except Bellatrix was standing right there and pushed for him to make an unbreakable vow with Narcissa, the kind of vow that kills you if you break it, just to make sure he meant it. Snape agreed to that too, and Bellatrix took that as proof of loyalty. It should probably have raised more questions than it answered, but nobody in that room was asking the right ones. Bellatrix spent that year training Draco, occlumency, defensive magic, how to hold himself together under pressure. Draco spent it repairing a vanishing cabinet that would allow Death Eaters to enter Hogwarts. When the moment finally came, he got Dumbledore cornered and couldn't go through with it. Snape fulfilled the unbreakable vow and killed Dumbledore himself. As they fled that night, Bellatrix set Hagrid's hut on fire on the way out, because she simply could not leave without doing something completely unnecessary on the way out the door. But the worst was still coming, and the Malfoys were about to find out what it actually meant to have Voldemort living in their house. The Dark Lord came to dinner. After Dumbledore's death, Voldemort's rise was total, and the Malfoys discovered very quickly that having the Dark Lord as a house guest was considerably less glamorous than it sounds. Malfoy Manor became Voldemort's base of operations. Lucius, freed from Azkaban, came home to find his house occupied, his wand taken by Voldemort personally, and his family publicly humiliated at Death Eater meetings where Voldemort casually referenced Andromeda's marriage to a Muggle-born, and the family's embarrassed embarrassing connections to blood traitors. The man who had spent decades wielding the Malfoy name like a weapon was now being mocked with it in his own dining room. Narcissa sat through every meeting with perfect composure and said absolutely nothing. She was very good at that. To give you some context on where Andromeda was during all of this, things were considerably harder on her side. With the Muggleborn Registration Commission now hunting Muggleborns across Britain, Ted was forced to go on the run. Andromeda, protected by her pureblood status, stayed behind. Alone in the house they had built together, unable to help him, waiting for news. The one piece of brightness in all of that darkness was that Tonks was pregnant. A baby boy was coming. Andromeda was going to be a grandmother. Now, back at Malfoy Manor, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were captured by Snatchers and brought directly to Voldemort's dining room. Bellatrix saw one of them carrying a sword she believed was locked in her Gringotts vault and completely lost her marbles. She tortured Hermione, demanding to know how they had gotten it. She argued with Narcissa over how to handle Draco. The manor, once one of the most prestigious addresses in Wizarding Britain, had become something between a prison and a war room, and nobody inside it was remotely comfortable. Then Dobby, the Malfoys' former house elf, the same they had treated as property for years, showed up and got everyone out. As they disappeared, Bellatrix threw a knife into the chaos, and it found Dobby on the way out. He died in Harry's arms on a beach shortly after, which is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the entire series. Voldemort was furious that Harry had slipped through their hands again, and the Malfoys, whose home it was, whose elf it had been, bore the full weight of that fury. And then the news came that Ted Tonks had been killed while on the run. Andromeda had lost her husband. She was now facing the rest of the war entirely alone, with a daughter fighting in it and a grandchild who had just arrived in the world. She held on to Teddy with everything she had left, but the war was not finished with any of them yet. And what was coming next would define each sister permanently: the Battle of Hogwarts. When Voldemort marched on Hogwarts, all three sisters ended up in the same place for the last time. Narcissa had already made her position clear. Before the battle properly started, she gave Draco her wand. His had been taken by Harry at the manor, leaving herself completely wandless in the middle of a war. She wasn't there for Voldemort, she was there for her son, and she needed him to be able to defend himself. When Voldemort cast the killing curse at Harry in the Forbidden Forest and Harry fell, it was Narcissa who stepped forward to check if he was dead. She leaned down, checked his pulse, and whispered to him, "Is Draco alive?" Harry nodded, and Narcissa stood up and told Voldemort that Harry Potter was dead. The most important lie of the entire war. Told quietly in the middle of the Forbidden Forest by a woman who had spent years on the wrong side of everything, for no reason other than her son was still breathing somewhere inside that castle, and she needed to get to him. That one decision changed the outcome of the war. Meanwhile, Bellatrix was still fighting. She was the last Death Eater standing beside Voldemort, which honestly tracks perfectly. She cast the killing curse at Ginny Weasley and came close enough that it enraged Ginny's mother, Molly. Now, Molly Weasley is not someone you want to enrage, as it turns out. What followed was brief. Molly killed Bellatrix with a curse straight to the chest. Voldemort screamed when it happened. A man who had spent his entire life claiming he felt nothing, screaming at the death of one person. Draw your own conclusions. Earlier in the battle, Bellatrix had killed Tonks. Remus Lupin was also killed. Andromeda lost her daughter and her son-in-law on the same night, less than a year after losing her husband. She was left with an infant grandson named Teddy, barely a few months old, already without his parents. Harry Potter, who had lost his own parents at 1 year old and had grown up knowing exactly what that felt like, stepped forward as Teddy's godfather. It was his way of honoring Remus and Tonks. After the war, the Malfoys were forgiven. They had stopped fighting. Narcissa's lie had helped it end, and the court took note. Lucius and Narcissa walked through that battle looking for their son, not for Voldemort. That mattered. Narcissa eventually became a grandmother to Scorpius Malfoy when Draco married Astoria Greengrass. Andromeda raised Teddy the way she believed her daughter would have wanted. Now, Narcissa says you're ready for the next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. All 24 major events you missed after the Deathly Hallows. Click now before she makes you take the unbreakable vow.